Have you ever heard of a single mother stumbling upon a hidden military installation right under an abandoned barn? In this story, Grace Carter faces eviction, buys a rundown farm nobody else wants, then discovers a locked hatch leading into a secret underground bunker, a discovery that attracts armed officials at sunrise. The twists only get more astonishing as she unravels the mysteries left by the farm's previous owner, a reclusive ex-Air Force officer named Raymond Pierce. Their secret, strange lights in the sky, experimental seeds, and a land that seems to defy the laws of nature. Curious to know how Grace defends her newfound home, protects her daughter, and grapples with a phenomenon that might benefit humanity or draw dangerous attention. Stick around for the entire story, and if you enjoyed tales packed with suspense, secrets, and heartfelt moments, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories just like this one. Grace Carter never expected she'd be haggling with a landlord over a dingy apartment in the outskirts of Greenfield at the age of 40. Yet there she was, surrounded by stacks of overdue bills, trying to negotiate a final extension. Her late husband, Michael, had vanished under mysterious circumstances 2 years prior, leaving Grace with a mountain of debt and an 8-year-old daughter, Mia, who suffered from chronic asthma. Initially, Grace fought to keep up with the rent using her small income from part-time environmental consulting. However, this last eviction notice felt like a final blow. The landlord, unsympathetic and irritated by months of late payments, gave her 2 weeks to vacate the premises. With nowhere else to turn and no close relatives able to help, Grace was at her breaking point. Late that night, after putting Mia to bed, Grace sipped lukewarm tea at the small kitchen table. Her eyes kept drifting to a photograph pinned to the refrigerator, Mia laughing in a park, free of the worry that now haunted both of them. Grace longed to provide her daughter a stable, healthy environment, someplace with fresh air where Mia's asthma might improve. Instead, they were stuck in a claustrophobic apartment building, where the stench of cigarette smoke seeped through the walls and loud neighbors fought at all hours. It wasn't just the physical conditions, there was a constant weight of fear and uncertainty pressing down on Grace's chest. Each night she'd wonder if tomorrow would be the day she and Mia ended up on the street. That same evening, Grace scrolled aimlessly through real estate listings online, mostly out of desperation. City rentals were prohibitively expensive, and the outskirts weren't much better. She had almost closed her laptop when an unusual posting caught her eye. Abandoned farm for auction. Starting bid 2,000. As is, the listing showed pictures of a weathered old farmhouse, a leaning red barn, and a mention of 15 acres of land near the small rural town of Sunvale. Grace felt a flicker of hope. It was obviously run down, but if she somehow won the auction at that rock-bottom price, she could own property outright without the burden of a mortgage. Of course, there'd be property taxes, potential renovations, and all kinds of hidden fees. But could that truly be worse than imminent eviction? She spent the night poring over every detail she could find about the abandoned farm. A name popped up in county records: Raymond Pierce, the former owner, deceased for several years. The property had been vacant, the taxes unpaid. The county had seized it and planned a quick sale. Why had no one snapped it up if it was so cheap? The listing mentioned major structural issues, possible code violations, and a lack of recent inspections. Seasoned investors likely knew something she didn't, but Grace was desperate enough to take the risk. She fantasized about wide-open fields where Mia could run without gasping for breath, an old orchard perhaps, or the possibility of planting a garden. Even if it was half-ruined, at least it would be theirs, truly theirs. By dawn, Grace resolved to try. She withdrew her remaining savings, barely scraping together the necessary funds. When she told Maya the plan, the little girl's eyes lit up for the first time in months. "We're going to have a farm," she whispered, excitement trembling in her voice. Grace nodded, forcing a smile. She didn't reveal the knot of fear in her stomach. They would attend the auction, and if by some miracle she won, maybe fate would finally give them a chance to rebuild their lives on firmer ground. Early the next morning, Grace guided their aging sedan down the county highway towards Sunvale. Mia, seated in the back, clutched a stuffed rabbit named Tilly, staring out the window at passing farmland. Although Mia's asthma often kept her home from school, this morning she seemed buoyed by hope. Grace silently prayed that the new environment might indeed ease her daughter's condition. She was also hoping not many bidders would show up for the rundown farm. If the investors smelled a profitable flip, her meager budget wouldn't stand a chance. Upon arriving at the county courthouse, Grace found an unexpectedly large crowd gathered. She clutched Mia's hand as they navigated the busy hallway to the auction room. Rows of plastic folding chairs faced a wooden podium where an auctioneer in a wrinkled suit flipped through papers and rattled off properties. Many people in the audience wore business casual attire, scanning lists of potential investments. Some were older, likely longtime real estate players. Grace felt out of place, wearing her simplest blouse and holding the sweaty roll of cash she'd pulled from her savings. When the auctioneer introduced item number 45, the Pierce Farm, the murmur in the room noticeably dropped. Several people glanced at each other but made no move to raise a bid paddle. The starting bid, $2,000. Grace almost couldn't believe her ears. She hesitated a second, heart pounding, then lifted her paddle. 2,000. The auctioneer barked into the microphone. He waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, but no other hands rose. Going once, going twice, with a thwap of his gavel. It was official. Grace stood there in shock, stunned that not a single rival had tried to outbid her. She paid the county clerk, a stern older woman with steel gray hair, who handed over a packet of documents. The clerk eyed Grace with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You do know that property's been empty since Mr. Pierce died, right? Locals say there's, well, no shortage of rumors about that place," she confided under her breath. Grace asked what rumors she meant, but the clerk shrugged. Small town talk. Strange comings and goings, weird lights at night people talk. Sometimes the simplest explanation is that old Pierce was just a recluse. Then the clerk lowered her voice. "But if you ever need help fixing up the place, you might speak to Marjorie Crane up the road." She was a close friend of Pierce for many years. Once Grace and Mia walked outside with the newly signed deed, the reality of owning a 15-acre farm sank in. She studied the key in her hand. The land and the rundown buildings were hers. A new start. Mia squealed in delight, hugging her mother's waist. Grace allowed herself a smile but couldn't ignore a sense of unease. Why had no one else wanted it? What were those rumors, and why was the clerk so concerned? Still, a part of her brimmed with relief. They had sidestepped eviction for now. Maybe this isolated stretch of countryside would be the perfect place to start over, a chance to breathe, literally and metaphorically. With Mia's health at the forefront of her mind, Grace put the key in the ignition and headed toward their new home, turning over in her thoughts all the possibilities and all the potential pitfalls that might await them at the Pierce farm. The drive to the property wound through rolling hills and thick groves of oak trees. Sunvale was a modest community, dotted with old barns and wooden fences, far removed from the noise and smoke of the city. Grace felt a stirring of cautious optimism when she saw the picturesque meadows, though large portions were overgrown with knee-high grass. Eventually, they reached a wooden sign so weathered the name Pierce was barely legible. A gravel driveway curved behind it, leading up a gentle slope. At the top of that slope, the farmhouse emerged. Mia pressed her face to the window. The house was indeed battered, paint peeled off clapboards that must have once been white. Several windows were boarded, and a wide porch sagged like a weary old man. Beyond the house stood a lopsided barn, its red paint faded to a dull rust color. A few smaller outbuildings, sheds or coops, peered out from behind a cluster of weed-choked bushes. Wind rattled an old metal windmill, producing a low, haunting squeal. Grace's heartbeat quickened. Was she crazy to think this could be salvaged? They parked near what remained of the front gate. Mia hopped out, excited despite the spooky appearance. She took a deep breath. "Mom," she declared happily, "I can smell grass and flowers, not smoke." Grace shared her daughter's joy, because if nothing else, the air here was fresh. Mia ran off to inspect a gnarled apple tree that had dropped, small, withered apples around its trunk. Meanwhile, Grace fiddled with the ring of keys, trying to find the right one for the front door. Entering the house was an eerie experience. Dust floated in beams of sunlight that cut through the grimy windows. Cobwebs laced the corners of the high ceilings. The furniture, what little remained, was covered in tattered sheets. Grace cringed at the musty odor of stale air and old wood. Everything felt frozen in time, as though Raymond Pierce had simply walked away one day and never returned. She tried the light switches, but nothing happened. The electricity had been cut off long ago. The main floor consisted of a living room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with ancient appliances, and a narrow hallway leading to a study. Up the creaking staircase, there were 3 bedrooms, one of which had a child's rocking horse sitting forlornly in the corner. Mia, tiptoeing behind Grace, pointed at the horse. "Do you think a little girl used to live here?" she asked. The question made Grace pause. There was little evidence that anyone besides Pierce had inhabited the place, but it did spark curiosity. They finished a quick tour, discovering that the plumbing likely didn't work and that several windows upstairs were cracked. Still, in the quiet hush of those worn walls, Grace felt the whispers of promise. Here was space for Mia to play, and the surrounding land might offer them an escape from the city's irritants. The property exuded a solitary charm like an old sentinel with stories to tell. Already mentally tallying repairs, Grace saw the uphill battle but also saw possibilities refurbishing the porch, planting a vegetable garden, maybe even raising chickens one day. As Mia trailed her, excitement glowing in her cheeks, Grace vowed to make this place safe and welcoming, no matter how many boards she had to replace or how many nails she had to hammer in herself. By the end of their first day at the farm, they'd managed to dust off a small corner of the living room to set up camping gear. The local electric company promised to inspect the wiring within a week, and Grace soon realized she would need a professional to evaluate the plumbing if they wanted running water. After a meager dinner of canned soup heated on a portable camping stove, Mia fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the excitement and fresh air. Grace, however, lay awake, haunted by all the questions swirling in her head. A single overhead lamp, powered by a battery pack, cast flickering shadows on the peeling wallpaper. She found her attention drifting to the study, a cramped room with a heavy wooden desk that had been locked when she tried the drawer. Possibly old bills, or useless junk left behind. She couldn't shake the sense that the house was hiding something. The next day, while Mia played in the yard, Grace decided to search for a local handyman. Remembering the county clerk's tip, she asked around the nearest store and eventually found her way to Marjorie Crane, an elderly woman who lived less than a mile down the road. Marjorie's small farmhouse was well kept, bursting with colorful flowers. When Grace introduced herself as the new owner of the Pierce farm, Marjorie greeted her with a warm but slightly cautious smile. Over cups of sweet iced tea in Marjorie's cozy kitchen, Grace learned that Raymond Pierce had moved to Sunvale decades ago. He was quiet, but he was no fool. Marjorie reminisced, seemed to know a great deal about plants, weather patterns, and all sorts of odd scientific things. Marjorie also mentioned that rumors swirled around Pierce in his later years, strange lights over his barn at night, unmarked trucks visiting at odd hours. He was either part of some hush-hush government program, or he was going senile. Marjorie joked nervously, yet there was affection in her tone, as though she knew him differently. Marjorie suggested Grace contact her nephew, Carl Crane, a skilled handyman. "He can help you with minor repairs," she offered. "And if you need bigger projects done, we'll figure it out. This old community knows how to rally around folks in need." Touched by the kindness, Grace felt a little relief. After months of feeling alone in a city that didn't care, having neighbors who extended a friendly hand was comforting. That afternoon, Grace returned to the farm to find Mia collecting wildflowers near the barn. "Look, Mom, I found daisies," Mia announced proudly. With the sunlight streaming across the fields, Grace felt a renewed determination to make the place livable. Yes, the roof needed patching, the windows were broken, and the floors creaked ominously. But, for the first time in ages, she sensed the possibility of a future worth fighting for. The wide skies and open fields felt like an invitation to heal, not just physically, but spiritually. Still, at the edge of her awareness lingered the puzzle of who Raymond Pierce had been, and why the county had been so quick to auction off his land. As night approached, Grace gazed out the window and wondered if any of those rumored lights would show. Part of her dismissed it as local legend. Yet, at the same time, she found herself glancing upward, half expecting to see something extraordinary flickering against the twilight. Carl Crane arrived the next morning, driving a beat-up truck filled with tools. He was a lanky man in his late 50s with a weathered face and a mild, comforting manner. He quickly began assessing the house's structural integrity, examining rafters, tapping on beams, and scribbling notes. If you're planning to make this place your permanent home, we'll need to shore up some of the foundation and replace a good chunk of that front porch, he explained. Grace nodded, thankful for his guidance. Although she would spend nearly all her remaining funds, she had no other choice. They needed a safe house. While Carl investigated the interior, Grace ventured into the barn to see if there was anything of value. The barn was dimly lit by shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the roof. Dust motes floated in the air. Inside, she discovered a set of shelves lined with rusted tools and old farm equipment. She found a few tattered notebooks in a corner, along with metal drums labeled with chemical names she couldn't identify. Concerned about safety, she made a mental note to have these tested or removed. A sturdy workbench near the back caught her attention because a few items were neatly placed on it: a small, handheld radio with a missing antenna, and what looked like a row of meticulously cleaned glass jars. Suddenly, Mia, who had been exploring on her own, called out from behind the barn. Grace followed the sound of her daughter's voice and found her standing next to a low door, partially hidden by tall grass. The hinges were rusted, and the lock was broken. Grace pried it open, revealing a cramped space beneath the barn's floor. It appeared to be a root cellar or storage area. She pointed her flashlight inside. The dark smelled of damp soil and age. Wooden beams braced the ceiling, but it looked stable enough. Mia shivered with excitement and a hint of fear. Slowly, they stepped in. Crates stamped with military insignias were stacked against one wall. Old tarps covered something large in the corner. Grace pulled back the tarp to find a heavy metal hatch built into the ground, complete with a wheel-like handle. Everything about it looked industrial and oddly out of place in a humble barn. The hush in the space felt almost reverent. Mia drew closer, her eyes wide. "It's like a secret door," she whispered. The wheel on the hatch was stiff, but after a moment of straining, Grace managed to turn it. The hatch lifted a crack. Peering inside, she saw a ladder descending into darkness. Instead of earthen walls, there were concrete slabs. A chill raced up her spine. This was no ordinary root cellar. Grace's environmental engineer mind started buzzing with possibilities: a bomb shelter from decades past, or some hidden facility. For a moment, she hesitated. Was it even safe to go down there? But curiosity overrode caution, and she carefully descended a few steps of the ladder while Mia stayed above. Flicking on her flashlight, Grace found a small underground chamber with sturdy concrete walls, fluorescent lights overhead, and what looked like old control panels along one side. A thick layer of dust coated everything. Wires snaked across the ceiling toward a closed metal door on the far end. Her heart thundered in her chest as she realized that the rumors about Pierce's secret might hold more truth than she imagined. She climbed back up, securing the hatch. Whatever this hidden complex was, it would have to wait until she could investigate more thoroughly and safely. That evening, while Carl tacked replacement boards on the porch and Mia dozed in a sleeping bag near the fireplace, Grace wrestled with a swirl of thoughts about their strange find. She yearned for answers. How had a man living alone on a farm ended up with a concrete bunker beneath his barn, complete with control panels and crates bearing military labels? The more she thought about it, the more the clerk's and Marjorie's hints about hush-hush activities came back to her. Perhaps Pierce had been involved in some government project, which now lay dormant in the bowels of her property. The next morning, right as Grace was pouring herself a cup of instant coffee, the sound of multiple vehicles rumbled up the driveway. She looked out the window to see two large black SUVs and a nondescript gray van come to a stop. The doors opened, and several men in dark suits and a few uniformed individuals stepped out. Alarmed, Grace hurried outside. Mia peered from behind her mother's legs, clutching Tilly tightly. At the head of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man in military dress uniform. A nameplate read McAllister. His voice carried an air of authority as he introduced himself. Colonel Ryan McAllister, United States Air Force. Are you Grace Carter? She nodded, heart pounding. We're here on official business regarding this property. We understand you're the new owner. Grace stammered that she was, indeed, but had no idea why the Air Force would be interested in her rundown farm. McAllister explained, in precise terms, that the property had once belonged to Raymond Pierce, a retired Air Force officer who had participated in a classified research project. Miss Carter, we have reason to believe there is sensitive equipment still on the premises. He stated, we would like permission to inspect. Grace felt her stomach lurch. Did the colonel already know about the hatch under the barn? On the other hand, they were clearly not asking so much as commanding. Armed men in uniforms fanned out, scanning the area as if searching for threats. Though Grace was protective of her newfound sanctuary, the presence of heavily armed personnel left her little choice. Fine, she acquiesced. But my daughter, she's only 8, so please don't frighten her. McAllister nodded curtly. Mia, sensing her mother's unease, slipped back inside the house. As the colonel's people began moving equipment toward the barn, Grace followed, determined to keep an eye on what they were doing. Sure enough, they made a beeline toward the same hidden door behind the barn that Grace had discovered. One of the uniformed men tested the rusty padlock and quickly replaced it with a specialized tool that cut through metal like butter. With measured, practiced efficiency, they lifted the hatch, confirming the presence of a ladder leading down. Another team member unspooled cables from the van, hooking them to portable lights and cameras. Grace's mind spun. If this was some outpost from the Cold War, or a monitoring station, could it contain chemicals or radioactive materials that threatened her family's safety? The colonel seemed oblivious to her anxiety. We'll be collecting what belongs to the government, he told her. Once that's complete, we'll determine whether it's safe for you to remain on the property. His tone was official, detached. Grace felt a sudden surge of anger. This was her home now. How could they barge in and potentially decide if she was allowed to stay? Inside the underground chamber, the Air Force team methodically removed tarps, opened crates, and swept decades of dust off old control consoles. Grace stood at the top of the ladder, peering down, too apprehensive to descend again. Colonel McAllister joined her, observing the operation. This site was part of a classified program run by Lieutenant Colonel Pierce decades ago. He said, from what we can gather, it involved advanced observation technology. Our records indicate it was officially decommissioned, but apparently Pierce kept some equipment. At that moment, a man in civilian attire, gray-haired, wearing a badge that read Department of Defense Research, emerged from the hatch and asked McAllister to step aside. They spoke in low tones. Grace caught only snippets, something about data logs and unusual readings. A woman from the same group approached her. She introduced herself as Dr. Sasha Lake. I'm a scientific consultant, she said softly, noticing Grace's tension. We're just cleaning up leftover technology that should have been removed. Nothing harmful. I promise we're not here to confiscate your entire farm. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. She guessed Dr. Lake was trying to be reassuring, but it was hard to feel reassured as armed personnel bustled about. So you're telling me the farm is safe, Grace managed. The scientist nodded. Almost certainly. Pierce was studying atmospheric anomalies. He believed certain phenomena were drawn to this region. But from the data I've seen, there's no direct threat to people. That said, the government still considers some of his research highly sensitive. Their conversation was interrupted by the hum of a generator powering up. Floodlights illuminated the chamber below. From her vantage, Grace glimpsed a cluster of monitors and dials. One monitor displayed images of starry skies, as if it had been capturing time-lapse footage. Another looked like a radar screen, Were these relics from Pierce's observation of anomalies? Could this tie into the stories Marjorie mentioned about strange lights? Despite her anxiety, a spark of curiosity flickered in Grace's mind. She had studied environmental engineering. Perhaps some of that knowledge might help her interpret whatever Pierce was doing. But Colonel McAllister's men moved quickly, hefting crates marked with official stamps up the ladder and loading them into the van. The efficiency with which they worked suggested this operation was meticulously planned. After a few hours, McAllister told Grace they were finished. "We've taken the equipment the Department of Defense deems classified," he explained. "The underground area will be sealed and left as is. We recommend you don't tamper with it." Then, in a formal tone, he added, "We also need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Strictly speaking, you're not to discuss details of what you found here." Grace bristled, but realized refusing was pointless. The colonel's expression left no room for negotiation. When the convoy finally pulled away, an eerie stillness settled over the farm. Mia poked her head out from the house. "Did they take everything?" she asked. Grace mustered a tight smile. "They took some old equipment they said didn't belong here anymore," she replied, swallowing the impulse to rant about the violation of her property. She tried to refocus on the positives. The men were gone. The farm was still hers. And the house, while dilapidated, hadn't been condemned. Yet the lingering taste of intrusion made her wonder what else Lieutenant Colonel Pierce had hidden and whether she'd ever uncover the full truth. Over the next few weeks, Grace poured her energy into making the farmhouse livable. Carl Crane patched holes in the roof, repaired the sagging porch, and replaced broken steps. An electrician was hired to evaluate the wiring, which fortunately only needed moderate updates to bring it back to code. The plumbing was trickier. A frozen pipe in the cellar had burst during a previous winter, causing rust and corrosion. Nevertheless, Grace insisted on forging ahead, funneling nearly all her remaining money into these necessary repairs. During this time, she also discovered small pockets of the property that hinted at Pierce's eccentric life. One afternoon, while clearing debris behind the barn, she found a dusty greenhouse, its glass panes cracked but mostly intact. Inside, raised beds were still filled with shriveled stems, possibly remains of exotic plants. Handwritten labels identified them as X17 hybrids in sample B1. Another day, she uncovered a trunk of meticulously labeled seeds in the barn loft, each envelope bearing a date and short note like planted near orchard, 1998 or high success rate, 2002. Grace found herself intrigued. She could see why rumors circulated about Pierce's hidden experiments. Mia, meanwhile, adapted quickly to the slower rhythms of rural life. Her asthma attacks decreased noticeably. Whether it was the fresh air or the absence of smoke and pollution, Grace couldn't be certain, but she was grateful. Mia loved wandering among the tall grasses, hunting for crickets, or attempting to climb the old apple tree. Each evening, Grace would read her a bedtime story by lantern light until the electrical work was completed. Although it was far from luxurious, the sense of freedom and open space seemed to nourish both of them. On a whim, Grace decided to plant a small vegetable garden behind the house. She used a few of Pierce's old seed packets, curious if they would still germinate. Working together, she and Mia tilled a patch of earth, cleared out rocks, and laid down compost. Mia delighted in poking each seed into the soil, patting it gently, and whispering "grow strong" as though each seed were alive. Grace was uncertain if anything would sprout. Some seeds were decades old, but she figured it was worth a try, not to mention the possibility of fresh produce if they were lucky. Despite the busy schedule of chores, Grace remained unsettled about the sealed underground chamber. The official line was that nothing dangerous remained, but each time she passed the barn, she imagined what might still be below, undiscovered. Late one night, she ventured out with a flashlight, creeping to the hatch. It was closed and welded shut by a new steel band the Air Force crew had installed, presumably to keep her out. She ran her hand across the cool metal, feeling more determined than ever to understand Pierce's legacy. Perhaps there was still a clue in those leftover notebooks in the barn or in the greenhouse with the X-17 hybrids. If there was something beneficial or harmful about the land, She needed to know. When she shared her concerns with Marjorie, the older woman simply nodded. Raymond was a puzzle. All right, she said, but he saved this town once, you know. In the 90s, there was a chemical spill from an old factory upstream. Raymond was the first to detect it, and he alerted the authorities. They were able to shut down the water supply before people got sick. That story, though lesser known, made Grace think that maybe, just maybe, Pierce had been doing important work all along, something bigger than idle experiments. If so, she hoped she could continue that spirit of care and vigilance on the farm. A month passed, and the farmhouse was slowly transforming into a modest but welcoming home. The day the electrician finally switched on the power, Mia danced around, flicking the lights excitedly. That night, mother and daughter celebrated with a simple home-cooked meal and cold milk from their very own fridge. Progress might have been slow, but it felt momentous. The following weekend, Grace decided to explore the greenhouse more thoroughly. Slipping on work gloves, she removed the shattered glass pieces and reinforced the frame with salvaged wood. Inside, she found an old metal cabinet with a heavy latch. It creaked open to reveal stacks of laminated documents in a ledger titled Pierce Farm Observations. The ledger contained meticulously dated entries describing soil tests, seed germination rates, and references to EM readings that correlated with times and dates. One column even mentioned nightly lights, along with sketches of orb-like shapes in the sky. Curiosity piqued. Grace pored over the entries in the kitchen that evening. One particularly intriguing note read, 28th June, disturbance at 2 m. Lights hovered over orchard. Soil test next morning shows abnormal spike in nitrogen fixation. Another 5 September triangular formation seen near barn. Apple yield tripled following week. Grace felt a chill as she recognized parallels with local rumors. Could Pierce have discovered that these strange lights somehow influenced the fertility of the land early the next morning? Mia ran into the kitchen squealing with excitement. Mom, the seeds we planted, they sprouted. Like everywhere, Grace followed her to the garden, astonished to see neat rows of seedlings peeking through the soil, far earlier than expected. Some small leaves had already doubled in size overnight. The lettuce, in particular, looked unusually vigorous. Had Grace just been imagining how robust they were? She mentally replayed Pierce's notes about accelerated growth following sightings. A part of her dismissed it as coincidence, but another part, the side of her that was an environmental engineer, wondered if these seeds were genetically altered or if the soil itself held some special property. As if in response to her thoughts, that night brought a breathtaking display in the sky. Grace was awakened by what she first assumed was a lightning flash. Looking out the window, she saw faint, flickering orbs above the barn. They moved in a rhythmic pattern, like a small dance, then shot upward and disappeared. Heart pounding, Grace debated whether to investigate. It was past midnight. Mia was sound asleep, and the memory of the Air Force's visit still lingered in her mind. But the next morning, she rushed outside at dawn to check the garden. Sure enough, the plants had grown noticeably again, especially the tomatoes. Shaken yet intrigued, Grace confided in Carl Crane. He looked at her with a mix of skepticism and wonder. It's true, old man Pierce used to keep a camera pointed at the sky almost every night, he admitted. But I always figured it was an eccentric hobby. Grace pressed him. You never saw the lights? Carl shrugged. A few times, maybe. Lights, silent, drifting in weird patterns, figured them for some type of drone testing. But none of us ever got a straight answer. Grace realized that to truly uncover Pierce's work, she might need someone more specialized, like a scientist who could test her soil, examine the seeds, and interpret the ledger's references. Because if these lights genuinely had some effect on the land, it was a discovery that went far beyond one reclusive farmer's secret hobby. Eventually, Grace recalled an old colleague, Dr. Noah Green, who had once been her mentor when she worked in environmental consulting. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but the situation seemed special enough to warrant an out-of-the-blue phone call. Dr. Turk Green specialized in soil chemistry and had a track record of investigating unusual environmental cases. If anyone could help, it would be him. She invited Dr. Green to visit under the guise of needing a thorough soil assessment for potential agricultural use. He arrived one sunny afternoon, stepping out of his car and taking in the farm with evident curiosity. Stocky, with kind eyes and a reassuring air of expertise. He carried a portable lab kit that rattled with vials and instruments. Mia peered at him from behind a fence post, her habitual shyness with strangers flaring up. But Dr. Green gave her a gentle smile, and soon she was pointing out her favorite tomatoes. Grace led him around, describing the farm's background and half-truths. She mentioned that the previous owner was rumored to be ex-military, that there might be old contamination, and that she wanted a safety check. She decided not to mention the lights, at least not yet. She was too worried he'd find her claim preposterous. But Dr. Green was quick to sense something deeper was at play. He meticulously collected samples, taking notes in a small spiral pad. When he tested the soil with a handheld device, he paused, eyebrows furrowing. "This nitrogen level is remarkably high," he remarked. "Off the charts, actually, for a place that hasn't been fertilized or farmed in years." After a few hours of sampling and preliminary analyses, Dr. Green sat with Grace on the newly repaired porch while Mia played in the yard. "I'm seeing anomalies," he said thoughtfully. "It's as though the soil's microbial community has been supercharged." He then asked if Grace knew about any testing or past experiments. Unable to keep secrets any longer, Grace finally confessed. She explained how Colonel McAllister's team had removed crates of old machinery from a hidden underground site, the bizarre notes in Pierce's ledger, and the lights in the sky. Instead of laughing, Green's face grew pensive. "I've investigated sites with unique radioisotope readings, or places near fault lines with unusual electromagnetic fields," he said. "But your story suggests an interaction with living organisms that's not typical of mere radiation or groundwater chemicals. It's as though something is intentionally stimulating growth." Grace took a breath. "Do you think it's dangerous?" she asked, glancing over at Mia, who was busy braiding wildflowers. Dr. Green shook his head. No signs of toxicity. "If anything, these levels could produce more robust crops. I'll run advanced tests in my lab, but so far, it looks beneficial though highly unusual." The conversation shifted as Dr. Green asked about the military's involvement. Grace could only guess that Pierce's covert program might have studied these phenomena, possibly as a resource for national defense. Dr. Green offered to stay in contact, analyzing the soil samples back at his university lab. "I'll keep everything confidential," he promised. "But if my preliminary findings hold, this farm is sitting on a biological gold mine, whatever the cause might be." That night, Grace felt both uneasy and hopeful. If Dr. Green's professional eye confirmed what she suspected, then the farm wasn't just a new home, it was a phenomenon. But how many eyes, official or otherwise, might eventually turn back to Sunvale once that was known? In the weeks that followed, Grace continued her daily tasks: repairs, tending the garden, handling Mia's schooling, and tried to live life as normally as possible. Still, her curiosity about the lights grew. Occasionally, she'd wake in the early hours, step onto the porch, and scan the horizon. Most nights, she saw only stars, but sometimes she caught a glimpse of faint, pulsating orbs that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Meanwhile, Mia's health improved drastically. Her inhaler gathered dust on a shelf. Even her school teacher commented on the change, noting how Mia no longer struggled in gym class or missed days due to respiratory troubles. Grace was thankful, but she couldn't help attributing at least part of the improvement to the farm's environment, an environment apparently enriched by some unknown factor. One crisp Saturday morning, Mia came running in from the garden, bouncing on her toes. "Mom, the tomatoes are huge, and the carrots, too." Grace followed her, amazed at the produce they'd grown. Tomatoes the size of softballs gleamed in deep red clusters, while carrots, thick and bright orange, jutted from the soil. The yield defied her knowledge of standard horticulture. Could the lights have visited again overnight, eager to gauge a neutral opinion? Grace took a basket of these vegetables to Marjorie Crane, The older woman marveled at their size and flavor. Good heavens, Grace, if you showed these at the county fair, you'd win every ribbon, Marjorie joked. But Grace hesitated, thinking about the potential attention. I'm not sure that's a good idea, she murmured. Might cause more trouble than it's worth. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. I can see why you're cautious, but sometimes sharing your blessings with the community isn't a bad thing. People around here could benefit from hearty produce like this. Just think about it. Grace nodded, not wanting to reveal her deeper fear that the second she showcased these miraculous crops, the military or other authorities might intervene again, suspecting some leftover classified phenomenon. Later that afternoon, Grace reviewed the documents she'd salvaged from Pierce's greenhouse. They showed patterns like lines on a chart indicating that every few weeks, there was a peak activity night, often coinciding with new moon phases. She flipped through to find the current date. Sure enough, according to Pierce's pattern logs, a new moon was approaching in 3 days. If the phenomenon still followed that old schedule, a major event might be imminent. That evening, Dr. Green called with an update on his soil analyses. I've never seen anything like it, he admitted. The microbial diversity is extraordinary, and there seems to be a consistent electromagnetic signature in the samples, like a low-level frequency that's stimulating plant cells. Have you noticed any difference in your orchard or wildflowers? Grace explained that the orchard was mostly neglected, but the trees seemed to be bearing small apples well past their usual harvest time. Dr. Green was almost giddy with excitement. Let me know if something else happens. I might drive up to witness it firsthand. When Grace hung up, she felt torn between excitement at the scientific discovery and dread of what else might come with it. She recalled Colonel McAllister's stern warning about meddling in Pierce's secrets. But those secrets were now blossoming in her own backyard. And turning a blind eye wasn't an option, not when they might hold remarkable benefits. Not to mention unstoppable curiosity for what truly lay behind the dancing lights in the night sky. As the new moon approached, Grace devised a plan. She would stay up all night in the barn loft, which overlooked the fields and orchard, to see if the rumored peak activity occurred. Mia was disappointed not to join the vigil, but Grace insisted it could be dangerous if something unexpected happened. Mia pouted, yet she accepted the explanation. Proud of her mother's secret mission, on the fateful night, Grace climbed into the loft just as twilight faded. She carried a thermos of coffee, a pair of binoculars, and her phone to record any unusual sightings. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, but the vantage point was perfect. Slivers of moonlight vanished behind the horizon, leaving the farm in near total darkness. Hours ticked by. She was about to nod off when a sudden flicker caught her eye in the northern sky. At first, she thought it might be an airplane, but the lights didn't blink in the typical way, nor did they move in a straight path. Instead, they darted in swift arcs, forming triangular or circular patterns. Her heart hammered. Grabbing her phone, she hit record. The lights grew brighter, shimmering in hues of white and pale blue. They hovered momentarily above the orchard, then swept low over the garden. A gentle luminescence spread across the fields. Suddenly, then, one orb detached from the formation, descending into the orchard. It hovered about 20 feet above the ground, lighting the apple trees as if shining a focused spotlight. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She could see leaves rustling. Though there was no wind, it was as if the orchard were reacting to the energy. Then, just as quickly, the orb rose and rejoined the others. Within seconds, the entire cluster sped off, disappearing into the starry sky, shaken but exhilarated. Grace scrambled down the loft ladder. She rushed to the orchard, phone flashlight in hand, half expecting to find scorch marks or something else tangible. The apples looked normal at first glance, but the air felt charged, like after a lightning storm. She reached out and touched a branch, no burn, no residue. Yet her intuition told her something profound had just transpired. Unable to sleep, she stayed up until dawn. When the first rays of sunlight finally crested the horizon, Grace ventured to the orchard again. That was when she saw clusters of bright red apples where a day before, most of the fruit had been tiny and green. It was as if the orchard had fast-forwarded in growth overnight. She picked one, biting into a crisp sweetness that defied belief. It tasted fresher, more vibrant than any store-bought apple she'd had. She told Mia about the lights at breakfast, omitting the scariest parts and focusing on how magical the orchard looked this morning. Mia squealed, insisting on seeing for herself. The child's face lit up when she tasted the new apples, eyes wide with delight. "Are these from aliens?" she teased. Grace shrugged, but deep inside, she wasn't sure how else to explain it. By mid-morning, she was emailing Dr. Green. "You won't believe what happened last night." She wrote, "Please come see this for yourself." Regardless of the government's hush-hush stance, Grace believed this phenomenon belonged to a realm of shared scientific wonder, one that might offer tremendous benefits to humanity. Yet a gnawing worry remained: would the powers that be let her keep exploring these mysteries? Or would they come back to bury them for good? Later that same day, Dr. Green arrived with equipment in tow, radiating excitement. He brought a colleague, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a botanist specializing in plant physiology. Together, they wasted no time gathering samples from the orchard. Dr. Marsh carefully sliced apples, examining the texture and measuring sugar content, while Dr. Green used handheld scanners to detect changes in electromagnetic fields. Both scientists looked increasingly astonished. "This orchard is showing the kind of metabolic jump I'd expect if the trees had been subjected to advanced growth accelerants," Dr. Marsh explained. "But there's no chemical residue or genetic tampering we can detect. Something else is triggering this." Dr. Green nodded in agreement, stepping back to admire the orchard's sudden bounty. "We have to consider the possibility that these lights, or whatever phenomena they represent, are interacting at a cellular level like a perfectly tuned environmental catalyst." Grace then confided the details of her late-night vigil, showing them the phone footage. The shimmering orbs were captured in surprising clarity, moving with deliberate grace above the orchard. Dr. Marsh's jaw dropped. "This is some of the best UFO footage I've ever seen, if that's what we're calling them," she exclaimed. Dr. Green took a more measured approach, calling them unknown aerial phenomena. Still, both scientists agreed they were witnessing evidence of something beyond current mainstream science. The group discussed the implications. If these phenomena could enrich soil or expedite plant growth, it could be a boon to agriculture. Imagine the farmland yields if harnessed or replicated, especially in places plagued by drought or poor soil conditions. But then came the elephant in the room: military interest. I suspect Lieutenant Colonel Pierce was either investigating or collaborating with these phenomena, Dr. Green theorized. Given the way that Air Force team showed up, they clearly still have an active fawn on him, and possibly on this farm. Grace's stomach tightened. She realized she was now not just caretaker of a property, but also the inheritor of Pierce's secrets. And with the scientist's enthusiasm, there was a growing risk of exposing it all. That evening, as they sat in Grace's kitchen, Mia sidled up to them, munching an apple. Dr. Marsh smiled at her kindly. "And how do you like living here?" Dear Mia grinned, bright-eyed. "I like it a lot. I can run around and I don't get sick anymore. And the apples taste so good." For a moment, the group fell silent, absorbing the simple truth that for Mia, the farm was a literal breath of fresh air, a place where she was happy and healthy. Grace realized that, at its core, the farm was more than just a scientific curiosity or potential asset. It was their home, a space of healing and wonder. She also sensed that she had a responsibility to protect whatever was happening here from exploitation or secrecy that might do more harm than good. By the time Dr. Green and Dr. Marsh packed up at their gear, the sun had dipped behind the hills, painting the ski in dusty pinks and oranges. Dr. Green promised to run advanced tests, but he cautioned Grace about broadcasting these findings. "If you attract the wrong kind of attention," he said gravely, "you could have more than just Colonel McAllister knocking on your door." Grace walked them to their car, her mind churning with equal parts excitement and apprehension. Over the next several weeks, Grace tried her best to live normally despite the extraordinary circumstances. She taught Mia how to bake apple pie using their orchard's sudden abundance, shared baskets of produce with neighbors who praised her green thumb, and juggled freelance consulting work to keep bills paid. Her daily routine was filled with chores, but in quiet moments, she found herself reflecting on how drastically life had changed since their days in that cramped apartment. Her child's laughter echoed across the fields instead of coughing in the night. The floors under their feet, though worn, belonged to them. Yet the phenomenon didn't stop. She and Mia kept noticing pulses of light some nights, especially around the orchard or the garden. While the growth spurts weren't always as dramatic as that new moon event, there was a continual sense that the land was being gently nurtured by something unearthly. Carl Crane, initially skeptical, now avoided the subject altogether. He'd seen enough unexplainable produce harvests to know something out of the ordinary was happening. Marjorie, on the other hand, found it comforting, remarking that Raymond Pierce must be smiling from above. One morning, Grace woke to the hum of an approaching car. Through the window, she spotted a sleek black sedan pulling up. Anxiety gnawed at her was the government back. But instead, out stepped a thin woman in a tailored suit. Accompanied by Dr. Green, they introduced her as Dr. Helena Darcy, a researcher who specialized in advanced atmospheric physics. She'd caught wind of Dr. Green's soil data and found it compelling enough to do a covert site visit. Grace hesitated, but Dr. Green insisted they could trust Dr. Darcy. She spent the day walking the land, scanning the sky with specialized instruments, and asking pointed questions about the nights Grace had seen the lights. At dusk, she set up a small field station behind the barn, complete with antennae and motion-activated cameras. For the first time, Grace saw the advanced level of technology that might be required to capture definitive proof. Dr. Darcy explained that if these lights had any distinct electromagnetic signature, her setup could measure it. "We want to identify exactly what frequency or energy they emit," she said. "If we can do that, we might replicate it in a lab." The notion of replicating this phenomenon made Grace uneasy. "Wouldn't that be dangerous?" she asked. Dr. Darcy shrugged. "All scientific discovery has risk, but imagine the positive applications. You've seen it firsthand in your garden. This could revolutionize sustainable farming, maybe help reforest areas that have been decimated." Grace nodded, torn between the exciting potential for good and her fear of government interference. That night, a mild display of lights appeared, though not as intense as the new moon event. Dr. Darcy captured partial data enough to confirm unusual electromagnetic pulses, but not enough to form a complete theory. She was still thrilled. "This alone could expand the frontier of atmospheric research," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. But as Grace drifted off to sleep near midnight, she wondered if they were nudging a door open that Colonel McAllister wanted firmly shut. Could publicizing these findings put Mia at risk, or even lead to the farm's seizure? The line between revelation and peril felt razor thin. A month later, life on the Pierce farm, now affectionately called Carter Farm by the local community, had reached a kind of steady rhythm. Mia, healthy and full of energy, ran across the orchard each morning to check for new apples. Grace juggled her own remote consulting jobs with coordinating data collection for Dr. Green and Dr. Darcy. The two scientists regularly exchanged findings, weaving together a mosaic of evidence that suggested these lights had a measurable, reproducible effect on plant biology. Plans were quietly being made to draft a research paper, though the question of publication remained thorny. Meanwhile, Grace never forgot the looming possibility of another visit from Colonel McAllister or other government agencies. She'd seen no sign of them since the initial incursion, but she was certain they were watching. Yet, as time passed, her resolve deepened. She was convinced that Pierce's work, now blooming on her fields, should be shared in a way that benefited society rather than locked away in secrecy. If these phenomena could help farmland around the globe yield more nutritious crops or restore depleted soil, wasn't it a moral imperative to uncover the truth? One late autumn evening, Grace, Mia, and Marjorie Crane stood together at the orchard's edge. The trees glowed in the last of the golden daylight. A gentle breeze carried the scent of ripe apples and dried leaves. Marjorie leaned on her cane, smiling fondly at Mia, who handed her an apple. I'd like to think dear Raymond is resting peacefully, seeing what you've done with this place, she said. Her voice quivered with emotion. He always believed people should know about these wonders, not fear them. Grace swallowed hard, tears threatening to form. She hugged Marjorie in thanks, acknowledging silently that this farm was no longer just an accident of fate, it had become a sanctuary for those open to discovery. That night, Grace and Mia found themselves on the porch after dinner. They watched the stars blink into existence as the horizon darkened. Mia curled up against her mother, content. Mom, she said quietly, I love living here. I don't miss the old apartment at all. At that moment, faint lights appeared once more. They drifted over the orchard, swirling in complex patterns. Grace felt no fear, only a sense of awe. She rose to stand by the porch railing, Mia by her side. Whether these lights were otherworldly visitors, a natural but undiscovered phenomenon, or some blend of both, they represented a doorway to knowledge, one that Pierce had cracked open years ago. Grace allowed herself to wonder if he'd known that someone like her would come along, someone who understood the importance of caring for the land and the people who lived on it. In the final hush of that autumn night, Grace resolved that if the world came knocking again, demanding to bury or control this secret, she'd fight back. She had too much to protect now, her child's well-being, her farmland's gifts, and the potential to do real good. Hand in hand, mother and daughter watched the lights until they faded into the vast night sky. Tomorrow, they would feed the chickens, tend the garden, share some apples with the neighbors, and perhaps recheck Dr. Green's new soil data. In this cyclical dance of nature and mystery, Grace sensed a deep harmony, as though the land itself was whispering gratitude. She closed her eyes, grateful in return, ready to continue the legacy begun by the enigmatic Raymond Pierce and determined to share its wonders. Come what may. Thank you for joining us on Grace Carter's remarkable journey from fleeing eviction to safeguarding a farm brimming with extraordinary potential. Through unexplained lights, accelerated growth, and military interventions, Grace found both the courage to stand her ground and the generosity to share her discoveries for the greater good. Her home has become more than just a refuge. It's a beacon of hope, reminding us that even life's most daunting mysteries can bring about incredible opportunities when met with an open mind and heart. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Could there be real-life counterparts to these phenomena? How far should we go to protect discoveries that might improve our world? Let us know in the comments below. We welcome every opinion and perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell to stay updated on our latest stories. Let's keep the conversation going and see where curiosity leads us next.